You know, it's funny the things you don't notice until it's too late. The way small details slip by, things you'd normally laugh off, until they're not funny anymore. That's how it was when we moved to that town, my wife Amara, our little boy Liam, and me. We were looking for a fresh start, out of desperation more than anything. We thought we could just escape our old lives, as if moving away could somehow wash everything clean. It was Amara's idea, in the middle of one of those arguments that seemed to just happen. We both said things we shouldn't have. I remember her voice, raw and trembling, almost whispering, "Perhaps we should simply depart. Go somewhere else to begin." I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, it wasn't like moving would fix everything. But sometimes, when things get so bad, you grab at anything, no matter how small or impossible it seems. So I packed up what we could, and we left. Headed for a place that we thought might be different, better somehow. Looking back, I don't even know where I got the idea to go to that specific town. A friend of a friend, maybe? I'm not even sure if I heard about it directly. It just seemed to appear in my mind, like a whisper, a suggestion that seemed so innocent at first. But nothing was innocent about that town. When we first drove in, it felt like we'd entered another world. There was this calmness to it. The way the sun filtered through the trees, the quiet streets lined with little shops and houses. Liam was asleep in the back seat, his small hand curled around his stuffed bear. Amara looked over at me, her eyes soft and hopeful. For the first time, in what felt like forever, maybe, I thought, perhaps, this place could be what we needed. Our house sat at the end of a winding street, surrounded by trees that seemed to lean in, as if they were watching us. The house itself was small, with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. It had a sort of charm, though, like it had been waiting for us. As we started unpacking, I felt something, like a shadow passing over me, a coldness that made the hair on my arm stand up. I glanced around, but everything seemed normal. Just Amara and Liam, lugging boxes and laughing in the yard. That didn't feel right. And then, we met her. I was unpacking the last few boxes from the car when I noticed someone at the end of our driveway. An older woman, just standing there, watching us. She was dressed in a way that felt out of place, like she'd stepped out of another era. A long skirt, high-colored blouse, her hair pulled back so tightly that it made her face look stretched. She didn't move at first, just stood there, eyes fixed on us with this strange intensity. I tried to ignore it, thinking she'd just pass by. But she didn't. Instead, she started walking toward us, each step slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving us. In her hands, she held a basket filled with something. Flowers, herbs, maybe? I couldn't tell, but the smell hit me before she even got close. Sweet and sickly, with an undertone that reminded me of metal, blood, maybe. Or something rotting. She stopped just a few feet away, her gaze shifting from me to Amara, then finally resting on Liam, who had stopped what he was doing to stare back at her. She smiled, a smile that was too wide, too eager. And when she spoke, her voice was soft and sweet, like honey dripping from a spoon. But there was something behind it, something sharp. "Welcome," she said, her voice sliding over the word like it was coated in oil. "I thought I'd bring you a little something. It's tradition here." Now I know what you're thinking, a gift from a new neighbor. It sounds nice, right? Maybe a little old-fashioned but harmless. And maybe in any other place it would be. But there was something about the way she said it. The way her eyes lingered on Liam, as if she was appraising him. Amara took the basket with a polite smile, thanking her in that soft, cautious way she had when she was uncomfortable. The woman's gaze lingered on Liam, her eyes gleaming with something that made my stomach twist. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked, bending down so her face was level with his. Her voice was smooth, almost musical, but there was a hunger in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. "Liam," he whispered, clutching his bear tightly. The woman's smile widened, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she was savoring the name. "Liam? Such a strong name," she murmured, almost to herself. "You'll fit in just fine here, Liam, just fine." Her gaze shifted back to me, and for a moment, it felt like she was looking right through me, peeling back layers of my mind. I forced a polite smile, nodding in acknowledgement, hoping she'd leave. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You must come to the offering tree tomorrow evening. It's important for new families. Brings good fortune. I didn't know what to say. Her words hung in the air, heavy with an implication I couldn't quite grasp. I wanted to say no, to tell her we didn't need any good fortune or strange traditions. But the way she said it, it was like a command. She held my gaze for a moment longer, her smile never faltering, and then she turned and walked away, leaving us standing there, clutching the basket of whatever it was. For a long time, none of us moved. Amara looked at me, her eyes filled with the same unease I felt, but neither of us said anything. What could we say? The next day, we decided to explore the town. It was a place that seemed preserved somehow, like a town trapped in amber. The buildings were old, worn but well kept, each one painted in muted, almost faded colors. The people, too, had an old-fashioned look to them. Clothes that were just a little too formal, smiles that were too wide, too eager. Everywhere we went, they greeted us with the same words. "Welcome to the town. Have you visited the offering tree yet?" The question was always the same, their voices carrying an undercurrent of expectation. At the grocery store, the cashier, an older man with thinning hair and eyes that seemed to see too much, smiled as he handed me my change. "The tree's special, you know," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Brings good fortune to those who make an offering." Changed my life, it did. I forced a polite smile, nodding along, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. There was something rehearsed about his words, as if he was reciting a line from a play. Amara noticed it too. She leaned in close, whispering, "Why does everyone keep talking about that tree?" Her voice was laced with unease, her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to be listening. I didn't have an answer. Everywhere we went, it was the same. The tree, the offering, the good fortune it supposedly brought. By the time we got back to the house, my head was spinning, my mind racing with questions I couldn't begin to answer. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt different, colder somehow, and every creak, every groan of the old wood seemed amplified in the silence. I thought I heard something outside, a faint whispering. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing there, just the dark, empty street, the trees swaying in the wind. Amara was restless too. She tossed and turned beside me, her breathing shallow and quick. I knew she was feeling it too, that sense of being watched, of something waiting in the shadows. And then, Liam started talking. It was the next morning when Liam started talking about her, the woman who'd brought the basket. At breakfast, he looked up from his cereal, his voice small but certain. "She came into my room last night." My heart stopped. Amara and I exchanged a quick look, and I forced myself to stay calm. I leaned down to him, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, buddy? Did you have a bad dream?" He shook his head, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if he were still in that moment. "She was there. She was whispering." He clutched his bear tighter, as if it could protect him. She said I'd understand soon." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, every instinct screaming that something was horribly wrong. But I didn't want to scare him, didn't want to add to the terror that was already growing in our minds. I told him it was probably just a dream, that no one had come into the house. But he just stared at me, as if he knew I was lying. Amara was quiet, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee mug. Neither of us said much after that, but I could feel her fear, a silent, suffocating presence between us. That evening, as we sat in the living room, there was a knock at the door. The sound was sharp, deliberate, echoing through the quiet of the house. I stood, feeling a strange sense of dread wash over me, and opened the door. It was the woman. The same unsettling smile, the same piercing eyes that seemed to see too much. She looked at me, then at Amara, her smile widening slightly. "It's time," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "The offering tree. It's tradition for all new families. It's important." I wanted to slam the door to tell her to leave us alone, but something in her eyes held me there, something dark and insistent, as if I couldn't look away. Amara's hand found mine, her grip tight, and I knew she felt it too. That strange, suffocating pull. The woman's smile never faltered. She nodded toward the woods behind our house, her voice lowering to a whisper. "We'll be waiting. Don't be late." And then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows, leaving us standing there in the doorway, her words hanging heavy in the air. When we arrived at the edge of the woods, there were others already there. Men, women, children, all standing in a circle around a massive, gnarled tree. Its branches stretched out like twisted fingers, the bark dark and rough, covered in strange, unrecognizable symbols. Everyone was quiet, their faces blank, their eyes fixed on the tree with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. The woman from before was there, standing near the front, her hands clasped in front of her, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. She nodded to us as we approached, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Welcome," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "You're just in time." She gestured for us to join the circle, and as we took our places, I noticed something odd. Everyone was holding something, a small object, a token of some kind, a charm, a coin, a piece of jewelry. Each one looked worn and old, like it had been passed down through generations. The woman stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "We gather here to give thanks, to honor the old ways, the traditions that keep this town safe," she intoned, her voice low and reverent. Amara's grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel her trembling. I wanted to pull her away, to take Liam and run, but I couldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, trapped by the weight of the moment. The woman's eyes found mine, and she smiled, her voice soft but unyielding. "Each of us must make an offering," she said, her gaze shifting to Amara, then to Liam. "It is required." Liam clutched his bear tightly, looking up at me with wide, frightened eyes. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that we didn't have to do this. But the woman's gaze held me there, her words sinking into my mind like poison. She stepped closer, holding out a small wooden box, her eyes never leaving mine. "Choose something that means something to you," she murmured. "Something precious. It is tradition." I reached into my pocket, feeling the cold metal of my wedding ring against my fingers. It felt wrong, giving it up, like I was sacrificing a part of myself. But I couldn't seem to stop, couldn't pull away. I dropped it into the box, watching as it disappeared into the darkness. Amara followed, her face pale, her eyes filled with a quiet resignation. She reached into her purse, pulling out a small locket, something she'd had since she was a child. She held it for a moment, her fingers trembling, before dropping it into the box. The woman's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction. She held the box out to Liam, her voice soft and coaxing. "And you, little one, don't be afraid." Liam looked up at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He clutched his bear tightly, shaking his head. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't want to." The woman's smile faded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It is necessary," she murmured, her voice low and insistent. "For the good of the town, for your family's safety." I felt a surge of anger, a protective instinct rising up within me. I stepped forward, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder, my voice firm. "He doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to." The woman's gaze shifted to me, her eyes hard and unyielding. For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. And then, slowly, she nodded, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. "Very well," she murmured, her voice laced with something dark and dangerous. "But remember, there is always a price." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow seemed amplified, stretching out in the darkness, filling the room with an oppressive weight. Amara was restless too, tossing and turning beside me, her breathing shallow and quick. And then, there was Liam. I heard him first, a faint whispering that sent a chill down my spine. I crept to his room, my heart pounding, and found him sitting up in bed, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. He looked at me, his voice barely a whisper. "She's here," he murmured, his eyes darting around the room. "She's watching us." A cold dread settled over me, and I felt the weight of the woman's warning, her words echoing in my mind. There is always a price. Amara and I grew more desperate with each passing night. We tried everything, prayers, rituals, even packing our bags to leave. But every time we tried to leave, something stopped us. The car wouldn't start. The road seemed to twist and turn, leading us back to the house, and through it all, Liam kept saying the same thing, over and over, his voice a hollow echo of the boy he used to be. "She's here. She's waiting." Desperation finally drove me back to the tree. I went alone, leaving Amara and Liam behind, hoping that somehow I could confront the woman, could make her understand the terror she had brought into our lives. She was there, waiting, her eyes gleaming in the darkness, her smile wide and unyielding. "You didn't finish the ritual," she murmured, her voice a dark whisper. "You didn't pay the price." I felt a surge of anger, of defiance. I demanded answers, demanded to know why we were being punished, why we were trapped in this nightmare. But she just smiled, her eyes cold and empty. "There is always a price," she said, her voice a soft, deadly whisper. "You came here seeking something, peace, happiness, but you must be willing to give in return." Finally, exhausted and broken, I gave in, agreeing to pay whatever price was required. And with a smile, the woman held out the box, her voice soft and final. "Give freely, or it will be taken." If you ever find yourself in a quiet, unassuming town, one that seems almost too perfect, remember this. Sometimes the price of happiness is far more than you can bear. And if they tell you about a tradition, about an offering, don't go looking for it, because once you step into their world, there's no going back.